You hand someone a piece of paper and they hand you a sandwich. Neither of you thinks twice about it. That paper isn't food, isn't shelter, isn't anything you can actually use. And yet somehow it works, every single time, everywhere on Earth. You've been trained your whole life to believe this is simple. It is not. What you're looking at is one of the strangest inventions in human history, and almost nobody actually knows how it began. Here's the version you were probably taught in school. Long ago, before money, people bartered. A toolmaker traded an axe for a basket of grain. A weaver swapped cloth for meat. This worked fine until one day it didn't, because the toolmaker didn't want grain, he wanted shoes, and the shoemaker didn't want an axe. So the whole system ground to a halt. Money, the story goes, was invented to fix this awkward mismatch. Clean. Logical. Almost certainly not what happened. Anthropologists have looked for a real historical example of a barter-based economy, one where strangers routinely swapped goods directly as their primary way of surviving. After more than a century of searching, the honest answer is that they haven't found one. Not a single clearly documented society that ran on pure barter before money existed. The scholar David Graeber spent years compiling this evidence, and what he found instead was something almost nobody expects. Before money, ancient humans didn't barter, they kept track. Not with coins, not with ledgers at first, but with something older and more human: memory, obligation, and debt. Picture a small community, thousands of years before writing existed. You're a skilled hunter. This week your hunt goes well, and there's more meat than your family can eat. Your neighbor's hunt failed. You don't march over and demand a trade. You give him meat. He remembers. Weeks later, when your tools break, he shows up and repairs them unasked, because that's simply what you do for each other. Nobody wrote anything down. Nobody needed to. The whole system ran on a shared, unspoken understanding. I helped you. Someday you'll help me. And neither of us knows exactly when or how, and that's fine. The French sociologist Marcel Mauss studied this pattern across dozens of ancient and indigenous cultures and found it was almost universal. A gift was never really free. Every gift created three quiet obligations: to give, to receive, and eventually to return the favor. Refusing a gift wasn't polite in these societies. It was a way of saying you didn't want a relationship with the giver at all. The object being exchanged mattered far less than the bond it created between two people. You still feel a faint echo of this today. Someone covers your coffee, and a small automatic thought appears: I owe them one. Nobody taught you that rule directly. It appears to be baked into you. The same instinct anthropologists trace back to societies that had never seen a coin. Consider how differently this makes you view a small favor. The version of you living in that ancient village wasn't being generous out of pure kindness, detached from self-interest. Generosity and self-interest weren't separate categories at all. Helping your neighbor was how you built a kind of insurance policy, one that couldn't be bought with coins because coins didn't exist yet. Your safety net was made of people who owed you something, and you owed them in return. An invisible web spun entirely out of remembered kindness. But here's the problem with a memory-based economy. It works beautifully in a village where everyone knows everyone. It falls apart the moment your community grows into a city, or the moment you need to deal with a total stranger from a trade caravan passing through, someone whose reputation you have no way of verifying and may never see again. You can't run a civilization purely on remembering favors. This is where something remarkable happened in ancient Mesopotamia, roughly 5,000 years before a single coin was ever minted. Archaeologists studying the region, most notably Denise Schmant-Besserat, uncovered small clay tokens buried at ancient sites, shaped like cones, spheres, and discs, each representing a specific quantity of grain, oil, or livestock. Temple officials used these tokens almost like receipts, sealing them inside hollow clay balls to record transactions. At some point, someone realized they could press a token into the outside of the wet clay before sealing it, leaving behind an imprint. Once people started reading the marks on the outside instead of breaking open the ball to check the tokens inside, they had accidentally invented something enormous. Not money, writing. The earliest written language on Earth may have emerged not from a desire to tell stories, but from an urgent need to track exactly who owed what to whom. Temples in Mesopotamia became something close to the world's first banks, recording debts of grain, silver, and barley on clay tablets, long before any coin existed. If you owed the temple 3 measures of grain, that debt was written down, dated, and expected to be repaid, sometimes with interest. This wasn't barter, and it wasn't cash. It was an entire economy running on trust in an institution rather than trust in a neighbor you'd known your whole life. So if debt-based accounting already worked, why did coins eventually show up at all? Coins solved a very specific problem that temple ledgers couldn't. Debt works when you're dealing with a stable community, a temple, a network of people who can hold each other accountable over time. It works far less well on a battlefield. Some of the earliest coinage in history appeared in ancient Lydia around the 7th century BCE, and historians have linked it closely to paying soldiers. An army is the opposite of a stable community. Soldiers move constantly, fight strangers, and can't wait around for a temple to settle their accounts. A coin solved that instantly. It carried its value with it, needed no relationship, no memory, and no institution to vouch for it beyond the authority stamped onto its face. That single shift changed everything. Debt used to move sideways, between people who trusted each other personally. Coins let debt move in any direction, between total strangers, enforced not by memory or relationship, but by a shared belief in a stamped piece of metal. It's a strange kind of magic when you think about it. The coin itself is nearly worthless. What actually has value is the collective agreement to pretend that it does. And that agreement is still the entire foundation of the money in your pocket today, or the numbers glowing on your banking app. You're not using a neutral, modern tool invented purely for convenience. You're using the latest interface layered on top of an ancient human habit. The same instinct that made a hunter share meat with a hungry neighbor, trusting that somehow, someday, it would find its way back to him. There's a detail in this story that rarely gets mentioned, and it changes how you should think about coins entirely. Once a king could mint standardized coins, he could also tax his population in the exact same coins he'd just paid his soldiers with. That closed a loop. Soldiers spent their coins buying food and goods from local farmers and merchants. Those farmers and merchants then owed taxes back to the king, payable only in the coins he controlled. Suddenly, everyone in the kingdom had a reason to want those coins, because everyone owed something to the same central authority. The coin wasn't just a convenience for trade, it was a tool of control, engineered to bind an entire population to the state that issued it. This is a much stranger origin story than the one about a farmer and a shoemaker failing to strike a fair trade. Debt, in this version of history, didn't start out flowing outward from ordinary people making deals with each other. It started out flowing upward from citizens to institutions, enforced by law rather than by memory or friendship. That shift from debt between equals who trusted each other to debt owed to a distant, powerful authority may be one of the most consequential turns in the entire economic history of our species, and it happened quietly, hidden inside something as small and ordinary as a coin in your palm. You can still find traces of the older system today in places where markets haven't fully taken over. Anthropologists studying gift economies in parts of the Pacific, among some indigenous communities in North America, and in informal mutual aid networks even inside modern cities, describe something that can feel almost backwards to someone raised entirely around markets. In these systems, status doesn't come from hoarding wealth, it comes from giving it away. The most respected person in the community isn't the one who kept the most grain locked up. It's the one who threw the biggest feasts, shared the widest surplus, and built the largest invisible web of people who owed them. Not coins, but goodwill. That flips an assumption you've probably never questioned. You likely assume that self-interest and accumulation are the natural, default settings of human behavior, and that generosity is something cultures had to teach on top of that. The historical and anthropological records suggest the opposite might be closer to the truth. Sharing and reciprocity appear to be the older, deeper layer of human behavior. Hoarding wealth without circulating it back into relationships is the unusual pattern, the one that needed coins, contracts, and eventually banks to make it feel like the obvious way to live. Which brings us all the way back to you, standing at a counter handing over a piece of paper for a sandwich. That small, unremarkable moment carries an enormous amount of hidden history. The paper itself has no real value. What has value is a chain of trust that stretches back through banks, through governments, through kings minting coins to pay armies, through temple priests recording grain debts on wet clay, all the way back to a hunter sharing meat with a hungry neighbor and trusting, without a single word written down, that it would eventually come back around. So the next time you hand someone a piece of paper for a sandwich, remember what you're actually doing. You're not completing a simple trade. You're adding one more line to the oldest ledger our species has ever kept, a ledger with no real beginning, written not in ink, but in the very human feeling that we owe each other something.